Everybody does it. Everybody knows you do it, none of y'all are safe. You do it with your friends late at night when you think nobody's watching. Your parents do it, they know you do it. And honestly, I don't blame them. Feels good, that's not my business. We as humans have been doing it for thousands of years. Helps us think, helps us relax, helps us to know one another. What do y'all think it is?
We.
It's board games, freaks. They're one of humankind's most mundane yet impactful inventions. They've been a part of cultures for thousands of years. They've helped people understand the problems that they actually face. It's a weird thing, though. In the past, however long, they've kind of become an offside hobby for kids or sad and lonely adults, and that happens to be the case. I'm the saddest, loneliest adult in this room. I love board games. In truth, they're tools that allow us to work through and understand very complex things. They make us inherently more creative, flexible, and innovative in how we think about the problems we face. And some would dismiss this to being the competitive spirit of humans, but I think there's more to it than that. I think it's something that we've always been good at and something we can stand to be better at also, which is just simply coming together to understand, speak through, and talk about an issue. We can go back 7,000 years and see the first evidence of board games in Mesopotamia. The games of our ancestors were inspired by their own contemporary habits, issues, and understandings of the world around them. The games were tangible depictions of these processes that they believed governed them, or how the world worked around them. These games usually depicted a person moving through their life and into the afterlife, and they gave humans the ability to better comprehend where they stood in relation to these far-off, abstract, dynamic processes that were relatively intangible. Games like Mancala, Ludo, or Parcheesi are examples of these games. The games also explored more abstract things like morality. The game we know today as Chutes and Ladders actually started off as an ancient Indian game known as Snakes and Ladders, and it followed a person's journey through life, ups and downs in morality, and eventually making it to the afterlife. Of course, the games also describe ways that we interact with each other on a human scale, in governance, violence, cooperation, and the grueling reality of war. Adversaries, strokes of luck, strategy, all kind of come to the forefront in these games. Games that we know is like chess, Nine Morris. Kings, queens, generals alike would use these games to either advance their own wills or just show that they're smarter than somebody else. We still do that today. But what's interesting about these games to me is that they were enjoyed by everybody in a society. In the civilizations of ancient Egypt, China, and Babylon, these games were played in palaces and public spaces. And it was in these public spaces where even those that were high in society and low in society could take part in one specific activity together. All people and ideas were equal in the level playing field of the board game. The games were fun, thought-provoking, stimulating, and entertaining, and they all allowed for advanced conversation about those far-off abstract things that I mentioned, like war, diplomacy, those kind of things. Anybody could participate in those, so long as they could learn the rules or if they were just present to watch the game be played. There are texts and myths from ancient China that speak about how some of the most astute minds were actually observed in beggars. And when these beggars were able to best even the most regarded philosophers of the time, they'd be listened to. And these beggars and their lessons could have the ability to send ripples through their communities or the entire society at large. It's almost as if the voices of the forgotten and overlooked were able to bring up these issues that wouldn't have been talked about otherwise. The games were seen as cradles for the greatest yet most simple ideas that constitute an open and tolerant society. And this even has its roots in our modern language. In the French language, board games actually translates to 3 words, jeu de société, which translated literally means game of society. This exact same pattern exists in other old forms of languages that refer to games as this kind of communal activity that anybody can do, anybody can participate in, something that all of us should do. The point of the history lesson was just to say, we obviously play board games for many reasons, whether just to pass time with our friends, or to put our critical thinking skills to the test. But just like the games of our ancestors were inspired by their habits, issues, and contemporary understandings, our games do the exact same thing, for the premises are the exact same. For example, Monopoly teaches you about greed and why you don't go home for Thanksgiving. Sorry has taught kids to be the worst people you've ever met since 1934. And Risk still exemplifies the absolute grueling realities of war and diplomacy in our world, and some broken friendships. The complexities of our world are scaled down to these small, digestible scenarios. They help us cope with the complexities in our world. They take real-world challenges, real-world limitations, real-world dilemmas that take reasoning, collaboration, and innovation to solve and present it to us in this way that's very easy to get into. And there are a few applications that they have to our real world. For example, a game like Power Grid or Daybreak. In this game, you and your fellow players own different means of production to create energy for society, whether it be the United States, Europe, or Eastern Asia. You buy resources to power your plants at fluctuating rates, and this game explores consequences like choosing renewable versus non-renewable sources of energy. Popular sentiment and policies affect how effective your system might actually be. The intricacies of economics and the sensitive nature of geopolitics comes into play with this as well. And some people love these games so much that they create their own self-imposed rules, effectively fan fiction for a board game, to really make it really reflect the reality that they live in. So there might be a fan-made variant that introduces weather events that hinder supply chains, cause blackouts, cuts in efficiency, failure of the entire system. Economics, politics, preparation, or the lack thereof are very serious things. And we have all gone through this. You've been through a winter in Texas for the past 2 years, right? Exactly. So, another game, Pandemic Legacy. We've lived through this for the past 3 years. It's a little on the nose, but it reflects, in this game, you and your fellow players are actually collaborating as a team of world-saving doctors, trying to save the world from 4 diseases that are doing all sorts of things around. You're limited by time, resources, and things that are genuinely out of your control. The game's actually very well designed, but the game reflects a grim reality as well. The virus is able to mutate in the game. Certain technologies may not work or may not exist in certain parts of the world. Technology may not make it on time. It might be unevenly distributed. And what's cool about this is that the game forces its players to ask questions like, why? Why am I unable to move my piece to this place? So on and so forth, but that reflects a larger thing. Why can't I use these resources here? We have all this stuff here, why can't I use it there? And to step aside as a person who lived through the pandemic for the past 3 years, during the first vaccine rollouts, why were certain communities swimming in vaccines, but the places that really needed them the most immediately were unable to get them? And we knew that this was a thing, but why is that? What was really cool is that the game didn't ask me to think about that. I was like, oh, I can't move my piece here. Why is that? But that same application still moves on to this greater issue. Those are 2 pretty heavy examples. But I'd like to speak about one of my favorite games. That's a little bit lighter. Wavelength, or Codenames. They're about the same game, similar concept. What it boils down to is you got 2 teams, each with a leader. One leader who is able to do, one leader that knows all things about the game, but their ability to communicate is greatly hindered, and a team that's doing their best to interpret these clues in a very kind of succinct way. On their feet, the person that knows everything but is unable to communicate has to connect a lot of different topics that may not be related at all and convey a digestible, or most of the time, undigestible way to their team. And then the team in that moment has to step back and figure out, yes, of course, the clue, but also they're halfway forced to ask why the person might think the way they do, or think about how a person thinks, why they might relate to certain values, why they have an affinity for certain objects, looking into a person's history and their experiences. For example, I played a game of Wavelength about 1.5 years ago with some of my friends, and I found out that one of my friends cannot live without a shoehorn for whatever reason. So, because of that one specific round of that one specific game of Wavelength, we, a room full of fully grown adults, had a conversation about the inherent utility of shoehorns for a staggering 45 minutes. We still make jokes about that game today, and that was 1.5 years ago. But games like Wavelength are interesting to me because it seems like, well, first off, they're interesting because they force innovation in how we speak, how we think about things, how we connect concepts, how we interact with the world around us. But the game's also interesting to me because, yes, it has rules that eventually lead to a victor, but it seems to also have an ulterior motive of just having people come together to speak about an issue or things in their lives, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's an underlying goal, like Pandemic, of speaking about the complexities in our world. The game has a way of simply pulling that out of people. Complex ideas or mundane attachment to shoehorns aside, that's just something that board games have always been able to do for us. It's almost as if the interaction need not focus on the game, but rather us coming together to solve a common issue or to pass time discussing complexities. Power Grid, Daybreak, Wavelength, Codenames, these are just a few examples of ways games can reach into our societies. And to me, it's incredible to think that a cardboard slab and some plastic pieces has the ability to reach so far. But whenever I ask myself that, I also step back and think, that's probably the exact same thing that thought 7,000 years ago when it came to maybe a rock board and some metal pieces. Games were responsible for some of the most important bases of ethical treatment between people. And if these games were able to teach the people who play them how to move among people in the world, treating them equally, regardless of class, regardless of ideas, treating that in that equal playing field, they can very well do the same things for us. Board games foster an environment in which communication comes naturally, even for those for whom that skill does not come naturally. I've seen myself, people light up more than I've ever seen before because of a board game. They give a platform for those who might not have a voice or a chance to be listened to. And it does make you think, just like the beggars in ancient China and the Chinese myths, perhaps hiding among a group or people who lack a chance to be listened to or a platform might be the solution to complexity in our world. Now, for those of you who love board games, my people, and for those of you who don't love them yet, the next time you encounter an impasse or a problem, think about all the people, resources, or things you might have looked over. You might be hiding the things that can decode the complexity in your own world or our entire shared world at large. Now, to make an admission, as much as it pains my childish, lonely adult heart to say it, simply going out and playing a board game will not change the world itself. However, I firmly believe that it could change the way that you see it. Thank you.